gentlemen, we will continue with the agenda. It's dealing with the International Roma Day now. It's important to recall that we are a union of values in the European Union. We need to look at events all around the world. It's important to us what happens with minorities and others around the world, those who think differently. It's very important we define those values clearly. We have several requests for an oral question to the Council and the Commission with regards to International Roma Day. We have that from the EPP, S&D, ALDE, the Greens, GUI. I will give the floor to the authors of the oral question first of all. Mr. Chaki, first of all, you have the floor.
2 Minuten.
2 minutes.
Köszönöm szépen, elnök asszony, tisztelt kollégák! Április.
Thank you very much, President, colleagues. On the 8th of April, we talked about the International Memorial Day for Roma. The majority of the groups put together an oral question to the Commission and the Council. There was a strategy which was published in 2011, a national Roma integration strategy. It was very relevant at the time and we had a lot of hopes with regards to this. I represent the Roma minority in Hungary, and I think that's very important. It's a useful example, I think, for a comprehensive framework to defend the rights of minorities. I am convinced that the protection of European minorities is very important in this fast-changing world. Native minorities play a very important role here. We need to pay greater attention to the Roma. We need to do more for the integration of the Roma. I would like to draw your attention to 2 priorities in particular. The first priority is on Roma settlements in 3 member states. In Slovakia, in the east of Slovakia, there are a number of Roma settlements. People are living in undignified conditions. There are similar settlements in Romania as well. I was the Vice Prime Minister in Slovakia for 8 years. We tried to resolve this problem with settlements. We need to have a fund for the Roma, I believe, set up at an EU level, and also education for Roma is very important. I hope we have a very successful debate today. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Postnex.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To make tangible progress in our fight against anti-Gypsies, which is the root cause of the situation of the Roma today, we call for a project team on Roma issue to be set up, bringing together Commissioner Jourova, Thyssen, Crețu, Navracsics, Andriukaitis and Hahn to create non-discriminatory and complementary EU funds and programmes. We call for the continuation of the EU Roma framework after 2020, building on the findings and recommendations of the Court of Auditors, the FRA, NGO and watchdog organisations. We call on the Commission and the Member States to make sure that the projects financed by the EU are inclusive and fight segregation. Segregational practices must be clearly described and explicitly excluded from funding. As we can see that most mainstream programmes systematically fail to reach out to young Roma, we call on the Court of Auditors to check the employment and education programmes of the EU. We call for anti-Gypsies to be put in the focus on the national Roma strategies and anti-discrimination indicators to be introduced in the relevant fields. We call on Member States to design their country strategies on the basis of consultations with Roma representatives and pro-Roma NGOs, and then involve them in the running, monitoring and evaluation of the projects. We call on the Commission to set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission at an EU level and at Member States, to set up such commissions at national level, to acknowledge this persecution, exclusion and disownment of the Roma throughout the centuries, to document these in an official white paper and to make their history become part of the curriculum in schools. And we call on Member States to mark the 2nd of August as a Roma Holocaust Memorial Day. These steps are absolutely necessary to fight successfully against anti-Gypsyism. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Als nächstes hat das Wort Frau Ernst, Entschuldigung.
Mrs. Ernst has the floor next for 2 minutes.
Rajko Đurić schrieb in einem
Rajko Đurić once wrote in his diary, one day God decided to create humans. The carved figure then took form and he put it in an oven. He went off for a walk, and when he came back, the person was completely black. This was a symbol. God tried to recreate man. He remolded another figure, and this time tried to burn the clay. This time he opened the oven a bit too quickly, and the person was completely white. He then tried to create a third human, and this person had the colors of both. This parable goes to show that people are different but created by the same God. However, this isn't always reflected amongst children in Europe. In the range of colours between black and white, we find the Roma, and they seem to have been lost. They seem to have been disregarded. They've disappeared in Brexit and the flows of refugees, budget discussions, as if they simply didn't count. Sometimes we seem to forget that they number amongst those who are victims of racism. By 1945, more than 500,000 people of the community didn't survive the war. We all have an enormous debt to Roma. This is why the time has come for us to finally reinstate justice for these people, one of the oldest peoples of Europe. Freedom and justice. Freedom, equality, fraternity. This should also include Roma. Not just sometime in the future, but now, immediately, everywhere. Roma and Sinti count in society as well. They don't have to justify their demands. We've simply abandoned too many generations of Roma. The time has finally come for us to pay off our debt to them.
Nächstes hat das Wort Herr Javor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Javor. Next for 2 minutes.
Elnök asszony, tisztelt képviselőtársaim! Április 8-i
Thank you, President. Thank you, colleagues. This morning is International Roma Day, and we've organized the Roma week around that. We've organized a range of events, conferences and so forth. We are acknowledging and celebrating the Roma identity on this day and this week, and this is also an occasion for talking about the problems that the Roma have in the member states and in the EU as a whole. The European Roma strategy, so we have this strategy, and the member states also have national programs. But in spite of that, the situation of the Roma has not improved over the past few decades. They always have to deal with segregation, problems with accommodation, problems finding work. It's almost impossible for them to find work. The EU programs seem not to be working at all with regard to the integration of the Roma, and sometimes they even seem to be making matters worse rather than better. And the reason for that is that the actions of the European Union and the laws of the European Union are not being implemented and obeyed. And so we need to fight against racism and segregation. We need to make sure that existing laws apply, and we need to make sure that the member states become the bearers of the basic values of the European Union and that they respect the basic rights of the Roma. Colleagues, Europe has many problems. We talk a lot about how we can do this work successfully, but in any case, I think we all agree that if we don't manage to get the Roma to integrate, then the EU cannot be considered a success.
Anfragen, der Herr Kommissar Mimica das Wort.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Mimica has the floor now.
Honourable members, the Commission strongly condemns all forms and manifestations of racism and xenophobia, including anti-Gypsyism. It is indeed a root cause of Roma social exclusion and discrimination, and it hampers the efficiency of policies which have been put in place. The Commission is addressing the issue by a holistic approach through the enforcement of legal, policy and financial instruments. We have stepped up efforts to ensure the correct implementation of anti-discrimination legislation, including the Racial Equality Directive, as well as the Framework Decision against Racism and Xenophobia. We have launched infringement proceedings against 3 member states on discrimination of Roma children in education. The Commission considers that education is a powerful tool to promote citizenship and the common values of freedom, tolerance and non-discrimination. In this context, the Commission will propose a Council recommendation on promoting social inclusion and common EU values through formal and non-formal learning before the end of this year. The Commission will also launch a new pilot action with the Council of Europe to support the integration of Roma through enhancing inclusive education. In June 2016, the Commission launched the EU High-Level Group on combating racism, xenophobia and other forms of intolerance. It provides best practice guidance and strengthens the cooperation between the Commission, Member States, EU agencies, relevant international organisations and civil society. This high-level group is fostering discussions on the specificities of particular forms of intolerance, including anti-Gypsyism. Following up on the high-level group's discussion in December last year, the Commission has just published a document gathering key guiding principles on hate crime, training for law enforcement and criminal justice authorities. The Commission also supports Member States and other relevant actors in their efforts to prevent and combat hate speech and hate crime. In the framework of the high-level group, the Fundamental Rights Agency established a dedicated subgroup to support Member States in defining a methodology for data collection and recording of hate crime incidents. The Commission has also taken initiative to ensure that illegal hate speech is countered both in the offline and online worlds. On 31st May of 2016, we agreed on a code of conduct on countering illegal hate speech online with Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft and YouTube. We are now evaluating its implementation by these IT companies, and we will present the result of this evaluation by the end of May. The Commission is convinced that fighting discrimination and anti-Gypsyism must go hand in hand with fighting Roma social and economic exclusion. This is based on the assessment made by the Commission and confirmed in the Council conclusions on accelerating the process of Roma integration on 8 December last year. These conclusions urge Member States to acknowledge the discrimination affecting Roma, to recognise anti-Gypsyism as one of its underlying factors, and to fight it. The conclusions are very concrete and comprehensive in this respect. Member States are urged to act through enforcing legislation, broad awareness awareness raising, promoting a positive image of Roma, and promoting Roma culture, language, history through school curricula, media or research. The Council conclusions also urge Member States to recognise and commemorate the victims of Roma genocide. This is also why the Commission allocated €6 million as specific funding to projects promoting tolerance and fighting stereotyping, hate speech and hate crime. Another example is the two-year EU campaign For Roma with Roma, aimed at combating prejudices and discrimination, which ran through 2014 to 2016. Funding opportunities to fight discrimination are also available under the European Structural and Investment Fund, where the Commission encourages Member States to associate the representatives of the Roma community to the programmes monitoring and to promote Roma integration objectives. Finally, the Commission considers that it is our moral duty to remember all those who suffered under the Nazi regime, including the Roma. The Commission welcomed and strongly supported the initiative of the European Parliament to designate 2nd of August as European Roma Holocaust Memorial Day. The Commission has already encouraged Member States to do the same. The Council conclusions on accelerating the process of Roma integration also urge Member States to recognise and commemorate the victims of the Roma genocide. The Commission will continue to support the European Parliament in its action to bring the resolution to the Council for discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dankeschön, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Now we have the speakers from the political groups. First of all, Mrs. Hohlmeier from the EPP. Please go ahead. You have 2 minutes. Thank you very much, President, colleagues. In my own life, I've had a lot of experience with the integration of Romania. As a minister, I was previously responsible for this. And it's a shame that we're still having this debate, really, but I thank colleagues that keep raising this issue and putting it on the agenda. The integration of Roma has not worked yet. When we see the number of Roma who are on the poverty threshold, who are having problems finding work, I think it's very clear the situation we're in at the moment. 50% of the kids aren't even in school, so clearly integration has not been successful yet. It's difficult with the stereotypes we have to deal with, that people think Roma can't be integrated. They can. We can get them houses, we can get the children into school, they can have a good education, whether they're boys or girls. There are concerns about the treatment of children being involved in begging, but we really can do a lot of things. Now, Commissioner, statistics are all well and good, but we have to look at the reality of the situation here. From the side of the European Commission, it's just not enough to let member states act here alone. I have the impression that in certain member states we're seeing very slow developments when it comes to integration of the Roma. We need stronger support, more pressure to be applied. When you see people living nearby that have no houses, no schools, no prospects at all for the future, this is really quite difficult. We need to do more than just an oral question every year. We need to actually take specific measures. Thank you. Thank you very much for the S and D.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's worrying that the European Union cannot say that we've done a lot in terms of Roma integration. The Commission
says in its report that the situation is worsening in certain member states. 1 out of 3 Roma children go to bed hungry at least once a month. 30% of Roma households have no running water. This is happening in Europe in 2017. That's a shame. We have a strategy to integrate the Roma people, and I think that their desires need to be what we focus on. Member states still don't use money to integrate Roma people. With the rise of the extreme right in Europe, I think it's right that we recognize the consequences of the Holocaust. At least 500,000 Roma people were killed. In some member states, that was 80% of the Roma community. Thank you.
Ja, danke schön.
Thank you very much. For the ALDE group next, Mr. Jakovčić.
Mr. Commissioner, both you and myself are well aware that unfortunately Romas are connected to terminology as intolerance, racism, and other terms going against the values of the EU. All of those things that we are trying to promote here go in the opposite way. This is tolerance, appreciation of our differences, and among other things, the fact that the Roma are a minority who have suffered the most along with the Jewish community during World War II. Unfortunately, along with the Nazi Germany, the Ustasha movement in Croatia also showed what means killing people merely for the fact that they belong to a different minority who at the time was not tolerated. But I would like to stress something else today. I would like to stress that there are good examples. Regardless of all the tragedies we have been witness to, there are some excellent examples. Let me venture and mention a few things that I've done as the prefect of the county of Istria. I did my best to work for the Roma, and I can say that if we use some methods to be very specific, helping in their education, educating them in special kindergartens, helping with the school system, appearances in the media, helping them show their culture and their abilities, if we organize special councils for national minorities, if we help with micro-entrepreneurship, if we legalize their business on the markets, we can do a lot. I would like to stress here that the European programs, national programs, will never be fully implemented if local and regional levels do not become fully involved in this. Međimurje is another good example in Croatia. So we have Roma settlements in Međimurje which have a series of problems, but there are other good examples. So I would like to call upon the Commission to think about how to directly forward the European funds toward local and regional authorities, because this is definitely one of the ways to better integrate the Roma community in the local and regional communities. Thank you.
Herr Jakovčić, erlauben Sie eine...
Mr. Jakovčić, will you accept a blue card from Ms. Switcher? Go ahead, madam.
Dankeschön. Guten Morgen. Gospodine Jakovčić.
Mr. Jakovčić, we are not in the Croatian parliament, Croatian Sabor, but I've listened to your words and I really applaud your activities as the county prefect in your region, and I would like to join your appeal to have the funds directed towards the Roma community. Do you think that Croatia is a good example when we have a representative of the Roma community in the Croatian parliament, which I think is a good example, and we could call it and make it into a European practice? Dear colleague, I'm convinced that Croatia has done a series of positive steps towards all the minorities, especially the Roma minority included. The fact that we have one guaranteed mandate in our parliament for the Roma community is something which I'm not even sure exists anywhere else in the European Union. I'm not sure. But this is definitely a fine example and a good way to have a member of the parliament promote the interests of their community and show the level of the integration.
Thank you. For the GUI group, Ms. González Peñas. Thank you, Madam President. Dilem, dilem. That means I went, I went. Those are the first words of the Gypsy hymn. An old song, an old anthem, which is inspired by the history of Gypsies, in particular those who were victims of the Holocaust. In 1971, the 8th of April was declared the International Day for the commemoration of Roma rights. We're here today to commemorate that. And I think it's important that the European Parliament debate this question. Above all, we should act as spokespersons relaying our disdain for hate crimes committed against the Roma community and to remind politicians how much remains to be done. I think it's good to have an annual day in a calendar. This increases visibility and a sense of awareness in the population. However, the Roma population has spent decades of segregation, discrimination, poverty and social exclusion, which is well below European and national averages, and this applies in particular to women and children. We have to work with society as a whole to bring an end to these negative stereotypes concerning the Roma community, and the best way of doing this is to promote genuine and effective integration, social and labour immigration. We have to do away with special schools which still exist in some countries, separating Roma children from other children, thereby threatening their development and education. This is why it's so important for us to fight against institutional anti-Gypsyism. There are many examples of this in all countries in Europe. A couple of examples. The 2,800 Gypsy camps in Roma have been evicted by the police in France and camps in Italy. The next speaker for the Greens is Ms. Reinke.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, dear Commissioner, I would like to tell you a story of two brothers, actually two Roma brothers. They are about my age and they grew up in a city very close to my hometown. Their family accidentally came from Kosovo. When they were in the middle of their 20s, they were deported from Germany back to Kosovo, from their home back to a country that they almost did not know. They were divided from their families, their friends, their life. Their names are Kefayet and Selamet. They are two brothers, two very talented musicians who have found back home by now and express their hardship in rap music. They are two of many. They are two of many who have faced discrimination in the European Union. But they are also two of many Roma, and this is what we very often forget when we speak about Roma, who have resisted, who have found a way to deal with this hardship and to say that they want to fight against anti-Gypsyism in our societies. And not only that, they want to fight for a better life, for civil rights for all, for their families, for having perspectives, and for equality in our societies. They should be an inspiration to all of us, not only for the International Roma Day, but every day, because they will be amongst the people who will shape our societies in the future. Because do not be mistaken, the fight against anti-Gypsyism, against discrimination, is not just something that the Roma communities have to take care of. It is something that all of us have to work for. Because this is not only about the livelihoods and the well-being of Roma communities, but this is about our democracy. This is about whether we want to live in equal societies. So this is about our future as well. So I urge you, Mr. Commissioner, and all of us colleagues, let's stand up against any form of anti-Gypsyism in our societies and fight side by side with Roma people for a future of equality and democracy in the European Union. Thank you very much.
Ganz herzlichen Dank für die Fraktion.
Thank you very much. For the EFDD group, Mr. Aker, for 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, sorry.
Madam Chairman, this debate is about Roma, but because of the EU's 4 fundamentalisms, I will not call them freedoms, it is also about migration. your cult-like adherence to complete open borders means it has to be. The EU signed its own political death warrant when it expanded to the east and brought into the EU vastly poorer former communist countries. Using EU rules, the Great Migration westwards began. For the first time in British recorded history, net migration to the UK soared to over 250,000 and as high as 333,000 recently. One of the communities particularly hit was in Sheffield. According to reports, the Page Hall estate received an influx of 6,000 Roma and Eastern European migrants in 4 years. Such had been the pace of migration into the UK that the then government's integration advisor, Dame Louise Casey, was quoted to have said whole areas have changed beyond all recognition because of a failure by government to handle mass migration. Now, no one can deny anyone the ambition to get a better deal for themselves or their families. But as an elected representative, we are answerable to our constituents first and foremost. My constituents watching this know that they are my boss. Like any good employer-employee relationship, if my employers do not think I'm doing a good job, they will remove me. This is perhaps why UKIP has won the Thurrock local elections for 3 years running. What we have seen is the EU's top-down agenda forcing change on communities that no one voted for. Let's look at the Page Hall estate again, a whole estate transformed without anyone voting for it. In fact, one Labour politician, yes, Labour, warned of riots due to the levels of Roma migration into Sheffield. The knock-on effects of uncontrolled migration across the UK have seen school class sizes increase. Families struggle to get the right school place for their children. A&E waiting times are unbelievably high. The housing waiting list puts social housing beyond the reach of many of my constituents. And the pressures are always felt hardest in working class communities. EU policies have turned a Europe of different nations and cultures into a free-for-all. It may suit the rich and wealthy to have easy access to cheap cleaners and au pairs, but working class communities have seen their neighbourhoods change and opportunities disappear without their consent. Brexit gives us a chance to change all this. If the Conservative government betray the millions of people who voted for proper border controls, they will never be forgiven. We toppled one Prime Minister, we can do so again.
Herr Elker, Sie werden sich natürlich nicht wundern, dass Sie...
Mr. Aker, I'm sure you won't be surprised that after those comments, several people have raised blue cards. I think that's quite justified. Will you accept those blue cards?
Herr Federle, bitte.
Mr. Federle, first of all.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I must say that I'm very surprised that in this important debate, when we talk about integration, opportunities for the Roma people and remembrance of the Holocaust, the right honourable gentleman doesn't with one word address that situation. But what he does is taking on the majority position of the societies and blaming the Roma population of Europe. You're saying that they are flooding your society, you're blaming poverty on the Roma people. Roma people has been suffering all through the European history, but also the situation has never been better. It seems like the honourable gentleman is longing back to a situation where we could address and oppress the people, the Roma people of Europe nationally, and it was hidden because we couldn't address it. Today we have an opportunity to give prosperity to all of the people of Europe. Please address that in your reply and do not continue to attack the people that are moving cross borders.
Dankeschön, Herr Federle. Ich nehme...
Thank you, Mr. Federle. I would also like to take this opportunity to remind members that with blue cards, the answer and the question should be no more than 30 seconds. Please respect that time limit. Mr. Aker, 30 seconds.
Yes, I'd like to thank the honourable member for that speech. I don't know whether the translation was a bit skew-if, but I actually pointed out that the British government had no integration plan whatsoever. That because of the EU's policies, because of complete free movement, there was no integration plan. And because of the levels of immigration into the UK, there couldn't have been an integration plan because the pace of change was far too quick. And that was the point I was making. So trying to paint a picture of everything being rosy in the European Union is precisely why people are fed up with this place. And your failure to grasp this will mean that other nation states will vote to leave.
Erlauben Sie, dass Frau Post Ihnen noch eine Frage stellt?
Would you accept another blue card from Ms. Post?
Erlauben Sie, dass
Will you accept another blue card from Ms. Post?
Tack så mycket. Du var väldigt tydlig med att romer inte passar.
Thank you. What you said was abundantly clear. You said that Roma have no place in your society. I find it hard to fathom your lack of reason. How is it possible for you to say such things here on this issue? So my question is the following. Do you believe it was appropriate to say that when, or what do you think, that when the UK colonised half the world, was that better for the UK, do you think? Was it a good thing? 30 seconds.
Well, I'm happy to email the lady my speech, where she can see that she was probably listening to a completely different speech, and trying to put words in my mouth, madam, to make cheap political points actually debases this parliament and this chamber, which my constituents will see. Two-thirds of people in Essex and three-quarters in my constituency have voted to leave this place, and your ramblings there, madam, are precisely why they were completely correct to do so.
Es ist nur merkwürdig, Herr Elker, dass so viele Menschen.
Mr. Aker, it's quite surprising that so many people seem to have misunderstood what you said. We have another request for a blue card. Will you accept it?
They're not listening.
Já si myslím, že možná žijete na jiné planetě a že všichni tlumočníci nedokážou tlumočit vaše pseudorasistické.
We've just been. It's absolutely impossible for interpreters to do a job of interpreting your pseudo-racist discourse. You talked about the fact that all these people who went to the UK are criminals, they're taking British people's work away. You want us to believe that? Try and say that to the family of the Czech person who was killed with a chain a few weeks ago. And a British court released the Britons who murdered that Czech. They said that it was self-defense, although everybody could see on video that the Czech citizen was strangled to death with his chain.
Herr Elker, 30 Sekunden.
30 seconds.
Nothing to say to that level of rubbish. Another person trying to put words in my mouth. And you carry on doing this. Carry on trying to paint everything in the European Union as rosy. Keep demonising people who raise legitimate concerns. In my speech, I mentioned the fact that the British government had no integration plan, the fact that they hadn't put any plans in place to be able to manage migration when the European Union expanded. They're legitimate concerns, and concerns that led 17 million people to vote to leave the European Union. So carry on, sir, as you will. We'll be out of this soon enough, and you can keep talking to the echo chamber.
Dankeschön.
Thank you. I would remind members that the first clause of the Charter of Fundamental Rights says that human rights, and that covers all human rights, are inviolable. And that's a fundamental principle underpinning cooperation in the European Union, and I think that should always inspire and lead our work. I would like to ask all subsequent speakers to stick to that rule and that principle. The next speaker is Ms. Bisotto on behalf of the ENF Group. Thank you, Madam President. I have great respect for all peoples who have been the subject of violence and persecution, in particular those who suffered during the Second World War. However, having said that, in the face of the lie about inclusion, the European Union spends millions of euros on Rom inclusion. Millions of euros which are just wasted because Rom inclusion is practically zero. It's the Roma who don't want to integrate. This money should be spent on our citizens, our unemployed people, our poor families. Come and look at the situation in Italy, how unintegrated Roma are. Talk to mayors, to the police, to citizens who live near Roma camp. Just look at the newspapers, television. Every day you will see an avalanche of news about the problems caused for our citizens by Roma. And I will not allow you to say that we're racists. We simply aren't. We're talking about our real events which take place every day. every day and not just the international. Rather than celebrating an International Roma Memorial Day, we should actually be having a day commemorating our own citizens who suffer constantly from the problems caused by Roma.
Dankeschön, Frau Bisotto.
Thank you, Ms. Bisotto. I have 2 blue cards. Will you accept them? Ms. Post, 30 seconds.
Alltså, du visar ju ett stort mått av brist på...
Well, you really show a lack of intelligence here and a lack of human values here. You keep raising the same issue. You say you're blaming the Roma for the situation they're in at the moment. Is that really what you want to say here in Parliament? You don't seem to want to listen at all to what's been said. What about the values of the European Union?
30 Sekunden.
30 seconds. I live in Italy. I'm not living on the moon. In Italy, every day the police go into Roma camps involving illegal and legal Roma. They find children without shoes, undernourished, badly dressed. Meanwhile, their parents have Mercedes, big 4-wheel drives, enormous caravans. I've no idea how they buy those expensive vehicles, probably with European funding, but this is absolutely shameful, and that's all I have to say about it.
Ja, also solche Unterstellungen sollte...
Madam, I think we can do without comments such as that. Will you accept another blue card from Ms. Capini? Go ahead, madam.
Doamna președintă, stimată colegă, mă surprinde că n-ați ascultat apelul președintei noastre.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleague. I'm sorry that you didn't hear our President's call to listen to the reference to human rights in our fundamental charter. You say it's the Roma's own fault. They find themselves in this situation. What have you done? You are a member of the European Parliament. What have you done to help integrate Roma in Italy, to give them education, to allow them to go to school? What child doesn't want to eat? What mother doesn't want their child to be well dressed and well educated? Roma mothers and mothers too.
30 Sekunden.
30 seconds. The European Fund for Roma integration in Italy has either been spent badly or not at all. As I said beforehand, Roma children in Italy don't want to go to school. Their families force them to go out and beg or to steal. It's not me saying this, just take a look at the newspapers. Even in today's newspapers they talk about it. So, either we just get the bad ones in Italy and you get the good ones, or you're closing your eyes to reality. I would challenge anybody from Italy to say the contrary.
Noch eine blaue Karte von Herrn...
I have another blue card from Mr. Irvine.
Danke schön, Frau Vorsitzende.
Thank you, Madam President.
What are you doing? That's the question. That was the question of the lady. We know it. We know the stories. We can explain it. But what we are doing to improve it? What in your capacity? It's not about the European funds. What are you doing? How do you try to fulfill the Roma strategy of the European Union for 2012 or 11? Yeah, that's the question. Please give a short answer.
Frau Bisotto?
Io appena arrivata nel 2009 qui al Parlamento Europeo.
I came to the European Union Parliament in 2009, and one of the first things I did was to ask how much money was being spent on Roma. I found it impossible to understand where that money was being spent in Italy. Unfortunately, money for Roma and their integration simply has not worked. The problem is quite simply they don't want to integrate with us. This is the problem in Italy. I would invite all of you to come with me personally to go and visit the Roma camps. Obviously, we'll have to go with the police as well, because I simply couldn't go on my own.
Dankeschön. Ich war jetzt...
Thank you. I think I've been very generous with the blue cards, because we were still in the round of group speakers. From now on, I will only permit 1 blue card per speaker, because I do have to keep a close eye on the watch, of course. So I allowed those additional blue cards because this is a very important debate, and I think it's important that we enable the different positions in the House to emerge clearly. So I'd like to go back to the speakers list now. The next speaker is Mr. Českovský.
Děkuji, paní předsedající. Já si myslím, že tato debata ukazuje...
Thank you. I think that this statement shows how important it is that we celebrate this Roma Day. Before I became an MEP, before I started work, I worked as a street worker with Roma. And the interesting thing there was to see how their culture and how they lived with the rest of the Czech society and how it was developing. The Roma are different, and that's something we need to bear in mind. And the person who spoke before me said that they have a lot of problems, and that's true, they do have lots of problems. They do take drugs. They are criminals, but why are they criminals? That's the real question. And another important question is, how can we change that? In the EU, there are several million Roma, probably more than other minorities that are represented in the MEP. But they don't have their own vote. How many Roma MEPs are there here? None. How many Roma people have managed to battle their way through to a successful career? How many have studied at university? Now, there are Romas. There's one here with a Mercedes and another with a BMW, and another doesn't send his children to school. That's true. But why don't we speak to the people who work with them, doctors, lawyers and so forth, people who care for old citizens? Why haven't you talked about those things? That's my question. Also heard the colleague from Great Britain, the problems that the Roma cause in Great Britain, but why doesn't he talk about the Roma who are integrated, who go to work in the morning, and who help build Britain? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Niedermüller.
Köszönöm, elnök asszony. Szégyenkezve kell beismernünk.
Thank you very much, President. We should be ashamed and we should admit that it's not good to be a Roma in Europe today. These are people who are citizens of the EU. They have the same rights. Nevertheless, they have to face discrimination and segregation every day, segregation in schools, being kicked out of housing, discrimination on the labour market, or when it comes to getting access to healthcare. The European strategy has unfortunately not led to an improvement for the situation of the Roma over the last few years. So what we need is not just more debates, but real political will and commitment here. We have to resolve the problem with Roma settlements. We have to help with education and training for Roma. We have to create jobs. We need to do all of this. We need to act against racists, against anti-Gypsyism and discrimination.
Thank you. Ms. Alvaro Guzman for 1.5 minutes. Thank you. Anti-Gypsyism is an enormous problem in the European Union. Roma and Gypsies represent the largest minority on our continent. The institutions and bodies which are responsible for discrimination towards them must be condemned. We've heard news from Hungary today where an EPP government still has segregated schools for Gypsy children. In the European Union there are clear examples of discrimination in other areas such as health and housing. Austerity measures have caused havoc in European populations. On the contrary, however, the principle of equality, which is stated clearly in all European treaties, is disregarded and nothing is being done. This is a clear example of systemic discrimination, which means that in Spain alone, 15% of Romas complete compulsory education. The unemployment rate is more than 10% higher than the average, and 1 out of 10 Roma live below the poverty line. This is a direct consequence of poverty and social stigmatization of this part of the population, which is ignored and made invisible. If you don't name something, it doesn't exist. And what we need is a full recognition of Roma history and identity. We've all worked hard on the European Roma Holocaust Memorial Day. However, up until now, what we've done remains cosmetic, or at least it seems so, when we hear people from political parties who are segregating children in Hungary or other countries supporting this. In other words, it does empty all their words of meaning, I think. Thank you, Ms. Valero. 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. We are in the middle now of the Roma week, and it's probably a bit remarkable that we actually need such a week, but a minority that is so severely discriminated against cannot be allowed to be ignored. We need, and it makes sense that we devote this week to them, therefore. We have prepared a publication which looks at the situation of Roma in the various countries and suggests what we can do to improve their situation and to fight anti-Gypsyism. Why is there so much stigmatization? Why is it the case that this minority, which for so long has lived in our European countries, how can it be that they are discriminated against after all this time? But looking back several centuries, in the 13th century, the Roma were sold as slaves and that sort of thing. Things got a little bit better for them in the 19th century, but there's still an awful lot of work to be done. There are lots of deeply rooted prejudices against them in many European countries, and as children we learn that the Roma don't want to integrate, that they choose the misery of their existences. And we are always constantly seeing countries that laws are passed, but they don't seem to improve the situation. And we, as the majority, have a responsibility to change the situation.
Thank you, Mr. Chocol. 1 minute. Thank you, President. Good morning to all. This morning, I expected this chamber to be full of 751 members of the European Parliament, paid by the citizens of Europe and probably by Roma citizens as well. So I expected those members to be here addressing the real issues of the European Union, the real problems facing us. I thought you'd be talking about disabled people, unemployed people, young people, the real problems facing Europe. Security. In Italy, for example, there's a burglary every 2 minutes. That's the kind of thing I expected you to be talking about this morning, whereas in fact we're talking about fake victims, fake problems, as if they were credible, serious issues. So we look at the facts, but we don't try to understand the causes. We don't understand, for example, what people in Italy ask themselves. How is it the Roma manage to earn money? How do they manage to pay those expensive cars? What happens with public money which is being spent on water and electricity in camps? There are more than 120 illegal Roma camps out of 160 in Italy. Why is it that the children don't go to school? Who is behind the begging and crime committed by these young people? Those are the real problems. The fact is, of 2,400 minorities in Italy, of the minors with legal problems in Italy, 1,500 of those young people are Roma children.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to remind you, you know that there are many other meetings taking place at the same time as our plenary. You know that very well. You also cannot always attend the plenary all day because you have meetings elsewhere. It's just not possible. Secondly, I've decided that I will not take any more blue cards as of now because something is happening here which is not good for the reputation of the European Parliament. When we see how discrimination The way in which discrimination is discussed is something I just can't accept in any case. Mrs. Garcia Perez now has the floor for 1 minute.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Roma are citizens who are citizens with full rights. They have their own culture, they have a common identity, and that takes away nothing from their citizenship. Quite the contrary, this is a richness for our society. We have managed to make progress in social areas, education, the labour market, but there's still much to be done. And some of the speeches which we have heard today show very clearly that we need to fight against stereotypes. These stereotypes that lead to very negative behaviour amongst certain sections of society. It's not acceptable, it's shameful to hear European members of Parliament to say that Roma people are thieves, that they are creating conflict. Ask citizens who they think are the real thieves in your country. It is not acceptable. We need to fight against these stereotypes. We need to move forward together for social inclusion and to fight against the hateful messages that we've heard this morning in this Parliament.
Thank you. 1 minute, Mrs. Boylan.
Thank you. And I welcome the opportunity, unlike the Italian colleague across the floor, to mark International Roma Day and to recognise the culture and tradition of Europe's largest ethnic minority community. 8 million Roma live within the European Union, and while the EU has developed a framework, we all know that the situation continues to be awful for the Roma community. For years, the Roma community have been victims of forced assimilation. Their time-honoured culture and traditions were eroded, and the cohesiveness of their communities were shattered. We also must never forget that 500,000 Roma were killed by the Nazis during the Holocaust. We all must work together if we want to realise the aims of the framework, to break down the prejudices that do exist towards their community. And we must work to build trust among the community for the institutions within the various member states. Is it any wonder that children don't go to school when they have attitudes like we've heard today being faced with on a day-to-day basis? In Ireland, 2 children were taken from their parents by the police. Why? Because they were blonde and they couldn't possibly belong to the Roma family. So is it any wonder that there's no trust with the Roma community with the institutions? So it is not okay that in 2017 the largest minority group in the EU are still die early, to be illiterate and to live in squalor than the rest of the population.
Thank you. Mrs. Costa, 1 minute.
Cari colleghi, di fronte alla situazione.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the face of this very clear situation, statistics show us that only 10% of Roma children reach the high levels of education, plus enormous levels of poverty and squalor. None of us here would be able to say that we're living up to the values that this day marks. And so many things have been said that were completely unacceptable and not worthy of being said in the European Parliament. The national strategies must be subject to strict verification. We should also be looking at inclusion factors. I'm aware, for example, of the pilot project, which has achieved very interesting results in Romani to tackle school dropout. I've seen similar projects in my own region. I've understood a few things now. Clearly, we have to focus on efforts to fight discrimination. But desegregation alone is not enough. We need other measures. First of all, we have to get families involved. We have to provide young children with study bursaries. And by getting families involved, the results are actually fantastic. If we involve Roma associations, either religious or secular associations, who work very hard with the Roma community, we can push forward support measures. We could also be working with teachers and cultural mediators who have an important role to play in the intercultural debate. I don't think that the Northern League in Italy has been doing very much at all to tackle the problems.
Mrs. Ward, 1 minute.
In my North West England constituency, there is a significant population of Roma in both rural and urban areas. For example, the annual Appleby Horse Fair in Cumbria has become one of the most celebrated Romany festivals in Europe, filmed, photographed and featuring in tourism guides. On the other hand, public perceptions of Roma are still based on disinformation. Last year's referendum campaign unleashed a new wave of increased hate towards ethnic minorities, with Roma communities being particularly targeted. A Roma community development worker in Manchester told me that on June the 24th, the day after the referendum, a group of Roma children who used to play in a public park had disappeared from public view overnight, frightened by the rampant, unpleasant public mood towards people of different nationalities and ethnic backgrounds. Brexit has turned my country into a shameful, intolerant place, and the Roma were sadly amongst the first victims. The Brexiteers, UKIP, the Conservative government and the right-wing press must take responsibility for whipping up hatred on a scale not seen for decades. But on Roma Day, let's begin to find ways of addressing the issue.
Thank you. Now, Mrs. Flasika Benova has the floor. 1 minute.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne, pani predsedajúca.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since 24 that I've been in the EP, our party has been, political group has been working on the question of the Roma. We have working groups that have not only gone on mission to countries and worked with Roma there, but we've also come up with specific suggestions about how we can help this community. I worked with the Roma community at national level, in the national parliament as well. And during this time we achieved a lot. So today we don't only have to talk about what's negative, we can also talk about what's positive. But we have spent a lot of money to integrate the Roma, to get them to go to school. And my question to the Commission is, how does the Commission control and monitor how this money is spent? In many cases, it has turned out that this money has been subject to fraud and embezzlement and has not been paid out as it should have been. Mr. Lopez Aguilar has the floor now for 1 minute.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President. Europe has many things which it should commemorate if it wants to reconcile itself with one of the minorities which suffer from the Holocaust together with Jews. Above all, however, Roma have suffered from the hate and prejudice, and we've actually had many examples of that this morning. Shameful outbursts from right-wing populist members of the European Parliament. They were abusing their right to speak in this House, and I simply cannot stand silent in the face of these shameful outbursts which criticise the Roma community, which is an important part of the wealth of the European text. In April 2015, the European Parliament adopted a resolution calling on the Commission to do its utmost to persuade Member States to pursue best practice for integration of Roma. And there are good examples, in my own country, for example. What's fundamental, however, is to ensure that these words finally become acts. We want to provide an example to the Roma community, showing that we're able to adopt a self-critical stance, calling on the European Union to live up to its own promises. Thank you.
Mr. Skripek, 1 minute.
Ďakujem, vážená pani predsedajúca, za slovo. Rómovia patria k najpočetnejšej a stále
The Roma are one of the biggest minorities in the EU. Unfortunately, many Roma in the 21st century still don't have access to electricity or running water. They live in absolute poverty with no chance of improving their situation. The European funds that are supposed to help the Roma are not efficient. It's leading to greater corruption in Slovakia. We need to think about everything that has happened in the past, such as the Roma Holocaust. We need to help the Roma. Firstly, we need better education to help the children, things that their parents didn't have the chance to learn. And we need to put in place the right measures so that we can help Roma find jobs, be it in manufacturing or industry, so that they can improve their lives. I would like to say thank you to all the Roma and all the achievements that they've made. It's not talked about enough. The scientists, the teachers, the professors. It's the case in Slovakia as well. We have a Roma in Parliament in Slovakia now, and I thank all of them who've helped improve the situation.
Thank you. We now have Catch the Eye. We've got to running a bit late because of the lively debate we've had, and I'd like to give the floor to those people who have not yet had a chance to speak. And I hope that the others will show understanding there. Otherwise, we won't be able to catch up. Mr. Sogol, you have the floor for 1 minute.
Örvendetesnek tartom, hogy az elmúlt években a romák helyzete az EU figyelmének központjába került.
Thank you, Madam President. I've been active in the whole Roma questions for many years now. In 2013, the Council adopted a recommendation stating that Member States should introduce compulsory national strategies for Roma integration. It's also necessary that the 2015 Commission review called for greater coherence between national Roma strategy and EU instruments. Despite the existence of the instrument and the work done as part of the framework, Roma continue to be the victim of discrimination, marginalisation and segregation in many member states. In Romania, up until now, a great deal has been done to try to reduce school dropout rates. However, despite this, Roma are still subject to considerable disadvantage, exclusion and extreme poverty. This is why serious steps must be taken so as to promote equal opportunities and to bring an end to the generational continuum of poverty and exclusion.
Thank you. Mr. Caputo, 1 minute.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. The International Day devoted to the Roma people and the fight against anti-Gypsyism is a symbolic date, as is the Roma Holocaust Memorial Day commemorating the Roma who died during the Second World War. These are important symbols which help create a sense of cohesion in European society. Roma marginalisation takes many different forms. Ostracism and in some cases open violence, institutionalised violence which is highly dangerous, encouraged by vote-seeking populist politicians. It is true, it's not easy to promote integration of Roma culture. Their lifestyle is very different from ours, but it's an antique and unique civilization. At the same time, their culture has a lot to teach the rest of Europe, their sense of family values, community values and solidarity. A great deal remains to be done if we are to pursue full integration, which goes beyond simply organising commemorative days. Above all, what we need is a genuine awareness in institutions of what needs to be done.
Thank you. Mr. Notice, 1 minute.
Ευχαριστώ, κυρία Πρόεδρε. Με την ευκαιρία της 8ης Απριλίου.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the 8th of April, World Rom Day, we are seeing the Roma as victims of segregation in history. They were in the past seen as inferior beings. During the Second World War, there was the Holocaust of the Roma. The 70% of the Roma population was killed in the Holocaust. The EU recognized this Holocaust in 2011. Money needs to be made available to help the Roma integrate, into the labour force and also into for better education. Thank you. Mr. Weigel has the floor. 1 minute, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. Our great poet Prešeren once composed a very beautiful poem, and he said, "You cannot teach trees how to grow or flowers how to flourish or poets how to write poems." I think that we should recognize the Roma community because of their culture and because of their contribution to our culture. We should celebrate them because they are so creative and are willing to live with us. I think today is an appropriate day for us to apologize to them because of the injustices they suffered because of the way they live. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Scholtes, Greens.
Sich gemeldet ist aber offensichtlich, oder?
He obviously has left the chamber. Okay, Mr. Sver, please go ahead.
Thank you for the floor, Madam President. Commissioner, as a former Minister of Education, I think it is my duty to say a couple of words on this International Day of Roma. First of all, I would like to congratulate all of the Roma people. As my colleague Weigel said, the Roma people have played an important role in European history. They have an important part also in the European cultural heritage. I think that we should make sure that good practices are exchanged between governments. My government had a very positive approach towards the Roma population. We have adopted a particular concept called Roma Mentor. What does that mean? Out of the Roman community, we selected a couple of people who made sure that children do get included in the educational process from the early ages on. This institute as such was a very effective one, and I think that it could be exchanged as a good practice when it comes to the Roma policies. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Thank you. Now, in closing, Commissioner Mimica has the floor. Please go ahead.
Dankeschön, ganz kurz. Frau Präsidentin, ich sage auf Ihre Muttersprache.
Thank you. Madam President, I would like to use your own mother tongue to say this. I think you've just shown blatant discrimination. I asked to speak, I called for a blue card, and lots of members came after me, and you took their blue cards. You took these people over on the left and not me. I find that absolutely terrible and shameful. What you've done is in flagrant violation of what we're trying to do today.
Hat nicht nur Sie getroffen.
I'm sorry, sir, that wasn't just a question of you. I'm obliged to keep a close eye on the time, and I've also been trying to allow people who haven't spoken yet to intervene. A series of other people also asked for blue cards and weren't given the floor, so I most certainly did not show discrimination towards you. I was simply trying to maintain order in the debate, and I really do apologize if you feel personally affected by that. Go ahead, Mr. Mimica.
Thank you, Madam President. Honourable members, the path ahead of us is still long until we see that Roma are treated as any other EU citizens. The change will not happen overnight, but we must not let them stop us. We have to keep steady on course with our fundamental values. The Commission will continue to work closely and to engage into dialogue with all the relevant stakeholders, including the representatives of Roma and pro-Roma civil society organisations. We need to ensure that all actors involved in the fight against anti-Gypsyism are supported, including by strengthening financial and policy support to civil society and national authorities. Thank you very much.
Dankeschön, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you, Commissioner. Point of order, Mrs. Post.
Ja, tack. En ordningsfråga. Jag skulle vilja först börja med att tacka kollegor som har varit med i debatten.
I would like to thank the colleagues who have spoken, but I would like support for a letter to Mr. Tajani calling on a resolution against the hatred that we've heard in the debate here today, and I thank the President. Thank you, Mrs. Post. I did intend to raise this in the Bureau because this really did go too far. But thanks for having raised that point. Would anyone else like to? Yes, go ahead. No? Okay, then I'd like to thank you for this debate, which was a very important debate. Now, of course, everybody bears responsibility for what they say, and so we can hold people to account when they do go too far, and that's something we're going to look at. Next point on the agenda is the debate on violations of rule of law, human rights, based on Article 35 of the statutes. So we're going to talk about Alexei Navalny and other demonstrators in Russia. I will give the floor to